It's a joy today to wish you a happy Pentecost. Pentecost is one of the three great Christian festivals, along with Christmas and Easter, that we celebrate. And we, on the day of Pentecost, celebrate the coming of the Holy Spirit to the followers of Jesus. A little bit of background before we hear about that event from the Bible, just to put it into some context. After Jesus had been raised from the dead on what we call Easter Sunday, he appeared to the disciples and to others over a period of 40 days. And at the end of those 40 days, he met with the close band of disciples in Jerusalem, and he said to them, "Stay in Jerusalem until you have been clothed with power from on high." And he said to them, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." And so the disciples did as Jesus had instructed them, always a good idea. They waited in Jerusalem, and about 10 days later, on the Jewish festival of Pentecost, they experienced what Jesus had promised to them. And we hear now from Acts chapter 2, Luke's account of what happened on that day. When the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. Suddenly, a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. Now, they were staying in Jerusalem, God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. And when they heard this sound, a crowd came together in bewilderment, because each one heard their own language being spoken. Utterly amazed, they asked, "Aren't all these who are speaking Galileans? Then how is it that each of us hears them in our own native language?" And they then go on to list all the different parts of the known world, the Mediterranean world, from which they come and the languages that they speak. And it says we hear them declaring the wonders of God in our own tongues. Amazed and perplexed, they asked one another, "What does this mean?" Well, what does this mean? What did it mean then? And what does it mean for us today? I'll share with you a few reflections in answer to that question. What does this mean? I want to say a little bit, first of all, about the manner of the Holy Spirit coming on the day of Pentecost, and then say a few words about the result of the coming of the Holy Spirit. What did it mean then? What does it mean for us today? Firstly, the manner of the Holy Spirit coming to those first followers of Jesus. Luke tells us that as they were together in one place, there suddenly came a sound like the blowing of a violent wind from heaven, which filled the whole house where they were sitting. And then they saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. These two elemental forces, wind and fire, are given to us as pictures of the Holy Spirit coming. It was like a wind and like tongues of fire as the Holy Spirit came upon these followers of Jesus. And I think those two pictures in themselves are instructive of what the Holy Spirit is like. When the Holy Spirit comes to us, he comes to us as an uncontrollable force in a way, an elemental force, a force like wind or like fire. Of course, we can try to control those forces, and we can quench the Holy Spirit. David Watson was an Anglican vicar in York in the 1970s and 80s, and David Watson used to talk about the coming of the Holy Spirit, likening it a little bit to his sitting at his desk in his study. And sometimes as he sat at his desk with a window open, a breeze would blow through and his papers would ruffle and fly away. And David Watson's first instinct, of course, was to clamp down those papers and stop them blowing away and pull the window shut to keep the wind out. Well, the Holy Spirit, when he comes to us, can sometimes unsettle and disturb and change things and move things around. And sometimes we need the Holy Spirit to do that for us. Our instinct sometimes can be to try and clamp down those things. We want control ourselves. But maybe, just maybe, sometimes those disturbances are disturbances from God and from God's Holy Spirit. In this time of lockdown, many things have happened which have disturbed us, and things have been moved around and changed in ways that we could never have predicted and never have made happen ourselves. Maybe, just maybe, in some of those things, the Holy Spirit is disturbing us, moving us, changing things around so that we're better equipped to serve the purposes of God. So the Holy Spirit came to the disciples like a wind and like tongues of fire. And the Holy Spirit, notice, came not just to some of the disciples, but to each of them and to all of them. Luke says in Acts chapter 2, verse 3, that the tongues of fire separated and came to rest on each of them, and all of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. The Holy Spirit didn't come just to a particular group within the church. The Holy Spirit did not come just to the leaders of the church or the office holders in the church, but to each and to all. Now, certainly, the Holy Spirit distributes gifts according to his will, and some will have some gifts, some will have others. But each and all of us, as followers of Jesus, ought to receive the Holy Spirit, to be open to the Holy Spirit. For God does not show favoritism, but God comes to each and to all in the person of his Holy Spirit. My question to you is not just have you received this gift or that gift or the other gift, but have you received the Holy Spirit? It's a question Paul asked later on in the book of Acts when he got to Ephesus, and the people said to him, "We didn't even know there was a Holy Spirit. We've received the baptism of Jesus, but we know nothing of the Holy Spirit." And Luke tells us how Paul there prayed for them and that they received the Holy Spirit. Have you today received the Holy Spirit? And are you being filled with the Holy Spirit as God would have you? So, some words there about the manner of the Holy Spirit coming on the day of Pentecost. As fire and as wind to each and to all. The results of the coming of the Holy Spirit, well, the first result is that as these disciples received the Holy Spirit and were filled with the Holy Spirit, they began to speak in other tongues, in other languages, as the Spirit enabled them. They didn't speak languages that they'd gone to night school to learn. They didn't speak languages that they'd learned in any other way, but they spoke languages as the Spirit enabled them. The Holy Spirit gave them a gift which they could not have devised for themselves, which they could not have worked up for themselves, but was given solely and purely in the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. Similarly, we might find that the Holy Spirit gives us gifts and abilities that we could never have learned in night school, that we could never have learned in a human way, a supernatural, or to say it in the biblical term, spiritual gift, a gift of the Holy Spirit of God. And each and every one of us has a gift or gifts from God given to us by the Holy Spirit, gifts which we've not learned ourselves, which we've not devised ourselves, but which have been given to us as the Spirit has enabled us. On this occasion, on the day of Pentecost, the first followers of Jesus, in the gift that God had given them, this gift to speak other languages, used that gift to declare the wonders of God in their own tongues, in other tongues. And that's another consequence, a result of the coming of the Holy Spirit, that the followers of Jesus receive gifts, but also they declare the wonders of God. They're released in praise and in worship. The presence of God is so much among them that they cannot contain that presence. They cannot suppress that presence. All they can do is allow that presence to burst forth in glorious praise and celebration. Sometimes we like our worship to be dignified. I'm not saying it shouldn't be. Sometimes we like our worship to be ordered, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be. But sometimes, the Holy Spirit comes to us in such a way that we are just filled with exuberant praise at the presence of God among us. And the gift of the Holy Spirit to us enables that release of worship and praise. By all means, let our worship be dignified and let it be orderly. But let's allow also the Holy Spirit sometimes just to fill us with joy so that we can't help bursting forth in declaring the wonders of God. And the next thing that happens, as Jesus has told them, is that this will begin to ripple out. You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth, he told them. And as you read through the book of Acts, you see this exact pattern developing and unfolding as those first disciples share what's happening in Jerusalem and then in Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the known world. And there is here an outward movement from Jerusalem. Sometimes we talk a lot about getting people to come to things. How do we get people to come to church? Well, gathering is very important, and people coming to church can be an important step along their way to finding new life in Jesus. But we need to acknowledge that there is a dynamic from the Holy Spirit which moves us out, which takes us beyond the confines of where we are to our neighbours, to our further neighbours, to our more distant neighbours, even to the ends of the earth, as the Holy Spirit enables us. And that as we go, we continue to witness to Jesus Christ. So as we celebrate this Pentecost Sunday, I want to encourage you to allow the Holy Spirit to have freedom in your life, to come as wind or fire in whatever way he wants to come to you, to equip you with gifts which you've not learned and which you've not devised for yourself, but which have been the Spirit's gift to you to enable you to serve and to do the work of God. And then to be willing and to be prepared to be witnesses, not just to draw people to come to church, but to go out over this time of lockdown when we've not been able to gather in our churches. It's been wonderful that we've been able to go out. Sometimes that going out has been to talk to neighbours over the fence. Sometimes it's been to shout at them across the street. Sometimes it's been to communicate electronically, as I'm doing now. But that outward movement of the Holy Spirit is something that we want to celebrate and embrace this Pentecost time. Without that moving outwards of the Holy Spirit and the followers of Jesus from Pentecost as they went out from Jerusalem, we today would never have heard the good news of Jesus. Who does the Holy Spirit want you to go to today, that you might be a witness to Jesus? This Pentecost season, as we move forward and celebrate the presence of the Holy Spirit in us and among his people, let's vow once again to be open to the filling of the Holy Spirit, to being empowered by the Holy Spirit, and to being witnesses to the resurrection of Jesus wherever he sends us. Amen.